June 9th, 1884. Dear Mr. Hickman, I'm sorry to hear the stars have been making mischief for you, and I'm also very sorry to hear you've faced such misfortune in your life. You must miss your father and brothers terribly. It's very understandable you should find yourself so exhausted with the darker side of life. I've often felt that way myself, but meeting people like you and Miss Lottie and Dr. and Mrs. Frisbee, who are caring for my Katie and having benefited so much from your goodness, keeps my hope for a better world bright. Don't let the ugliness of mankind dim your light, Mr. Hickman. I know the struggle can seem daunting at times, but you are making more of a difference than you realize. In fact, you have made a world of difference to me. Since you were so confiding in me about your past, I will tell you a bit of my history in return. As you well know, Mike MacDonald isn't the only Irishman to try to get ahead in America by working outside the law. New York has its own underbelly, and unfortunately my father was well acquainted with it. He was a Molly McGuire, you see. At least he was before my mother convinced him to leave Pennsylvania and find work in New York. Being a Pinkerton, I'm sure you know about the McGuires. I suppose the old ways couldn't just be left behind in Ireland, not when every door was slammed in one's face and every opportunity denied due to prejudice. Though he left the McGuires behind in Pennsylvania, it wasn't long before my da joined another secret society in New York, the Ancient Order of Hibernians. Unbeknownst to my mother, he joined at the bidding of the Molly McGuires. Consequently, my father was heavily involved in the draft riots of '63. When Mama realized he was one of their leaders, she tried again to stop him, to save him from himself. She tried persuading him to leave New York and participate in the Homestead Act. She was convinced if she could just get him out of the grasp of the old ways and onto a piece of his own land, he would settle down and be content. Da even promised he'd just go as soon as the war was over. Unfortunately, he never got the chance to keep his promise. He was killed during the riots, and my mother was left a widow with 2 little daughters to raise on a dressmaking assistant's salary. It was very hard for her, especially with the added expense of Katie's need for constant doctor visits. Mama made countless sacrifices so I could advance to where I have as a dressmaker. She did this so I would be able to take care of Katie and myself when she was gone. I don't know if she knew something the rest of us didn't, but Mama died suddenly after I secured myself the position as Madame Lovelace's assistant. Our friend, Dr. Frisbee, was certain she'd simply died from the sheer exhaustion of it all. I'm sorry to share such gloomy, intimate details with you, but my conscience has been gnawing at me since I learned you were a Pinkerton. As I said before, I believe in being open and honest at the beginning of all acquaintances. I particularly felt I needed to tell you about my father's involvement with the McGuires before we further our correspondence, especially since the Pinkertons had such heavy dealings with them in the past. I share these things with you in good faith. I am my father's daughter, but I am not my father. If I thought for a moment you were the type of man who would shun me over such a thing as this, I'm sure I wouldn't have taken to you as I have. Despite my disastrous debacle with Mr. Gambit, I am actually quite instinctive about people, particularly the ones I meet in person. My instinct about you, Mr. Hickman, is that you aren't the type to cry off when some controversy or family secret comes to light. You strike me very much as the sort of man who stands fixed and true by his friends. I admire that quality immensely. Now for the latest news in Frisco, which I think you will find most interesting. We have been in quite a state the last week or so. There have been more murders, you see. Most are happening in the streets as usual because of drunken duels and cheating gamblers, but a few are different. Someone has murdered 2 men under the guise of the White Widow. It is causing a very real sort of terror to sweep through town. None of the women or children are allowed out after dark by their menfolk. Mr. DeMille has even tried to keep me from my work with Madame Shansing, the woman who has hired me to create wardrobes for her 2 daughters. I was confused by this at first, but I understand better once Mr. DeMille showed me the 2 articles I've included with this letter. I didn't comply, of course, but his desire to protect me was very fatherly and kind. A ghostly murder. Last night, the death of Albert Teague Jonas was reported to Mr. Jack Whittington, driver of the town dead wagon. When Mr. Whittington went to retrieve the body this morning, he found the cause of death to be very strange indeed. Not only was the man killed by nothing more than a lady's hairpin through the heart, but there was a series of Chinese characters written in white paint across his forehead. There was also a cryptic note attached to the hairpin. Reports from Teague's companions last night indicate he left Miss Lottie's establishment unaccompanied by way of Main Street and was never seen alive again. After inquiring amongst Frisco's Chinamen concerning the Chinese characters, it would appear our Mr. Jonas was killed by none other than Hector Link's ghost, the White Widow. White Widow strikes again. For the second time, bewilderment and fear are at war in the hearts of every man, woman, and child of Frisco. Yesterday morning, Mr. Jack Whittington, driver of the town dead wagon, reported the death of Ezra Odell under precisely the same peculiar circumstances as last week's inexplicable murder. It is the second of its kind, and the White Widow, or someone using that guise, appears to be responsible. We ask anyone with information concerning these deaths to please come forward immediately. The strange murders led to another town meeting, and it's finally been decided that we will have to make whatever sacrifices necessary to hire a sheriff. I truly don't know what took them so long. When I think of all the souls who have perished in this place, Christopher Columbus! I thought the war might have taught us better about the evils of killing our neighbors. I've decided to add to the sheriff fund myself. It will delay sending for Katie by just a stitch, but I'd rather have her come a little later to a safer Frisco than come right away and witness these new horrors. As to my part to play in this, after Miss Lottie used her influence to convince the menfolk to listen to me, despite my Irish heritage and sex, heaven forbid, I volunteered to write to you, which I was doing anyway, to ask for any recommendations you might offer concerning a suitable man for the position of sheriff. I apologize for putting you on the spot this way, but my hope is you might know someone, a truly honorable man like yourself, to recommend from your Texas Ranger days. You would be doing all the citizens of Frisco and me a great service. Mr. Gambit and his man, Mr. Wallace, returned to Frisco just in time to attend the town meeting. I don't mind telling you they both looked rather shaken by the news of these strange murders. After all, the two victims were some of Gambit's silver mine men. Gambit even went so far as to volunteer himself as sheriff. I laughed outright at the notion and had to excuse myself from the meeting. Thankfully, enough of the men in Frisco have seen Mr. Gambit's true colors and decided to vote against him. When I later went to deliver part of the money I owe Mr. Gambit, he was rather sore about the whole ordeal. It was also clear he hadn't had a very fine time of it in Chicago. He looked awfully wrung out and was rather cantankerous with me. I can't say I blame him, for if the rumors are true, I'd be just as cantankerous if I owed money to the likes of Mr. MacDonald. Ever since then, Mr. Gambit has been very insistent I either pay him the rest of what I owe or marry him as originally planned. I gave up hoping he was any sort of gentleman the moment I realized he was a thief. But I didn't think he would harass me so, especially when I've given my word to repay my debt as soon as I possibly can. Last week he even set Mr. Wallace to following me around town. Wallace hasn't done anything more than wish me good day or invite me to dine with his boss. But I don't appreciate being followed, nor do I relish my word being thrown back in my face. But I will keep my peace and direct my energies toward finishing my work for Madame Shansing. Then I will be free of Mr. Gambit once and for all. On that note, I'd like to leave you a few more words of encouragement regarding being weary of well-doing. Men like you, Mr. Hickman, the kind who fight against the lions of injustice and who risk their lives to protect the weak and vulnerable, are what make America the last place to run to, the last hope for the ideal, for freedom. You are the ones civilizing this wild country. In all your fatigue over the darkness in this world, I pray you will never forget the little girls, like I was, who have fathers caught up in the clandestine dealings and corruption of an imperfect, unjust world. We thank God every night in our prayers that good, fine men like you continue to stay true and to fight the good fight, despite seemingly insurmountable odds. One of my mama's favorite scriptures was 2 Kings 6:16. Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. You are never alone or outnumbered when you fight for what's right, Mr. Hickman. God will always stand with you. Yours very truly, Miss Lily Clara Moore. Continental Union Telegraph Company. Telegram. Sent by K.A. Received by S.M. Time 2:32 p.m. Date June 15th, 1884. Utah Central Railway Station, Kanab, Utah Territory. To Sam Pearson. Sam, sending a job your way, begging you to take it. Wrapped up in something crooked, or I would. Got a treasure in Frisco, name of L.C. Moore. Something is rotten in Frisco. Keep her safe for me, for old time's sake. Matt.